You've heard it said that men are hard to read, difficult to crack, slow to attach. But that's only half the story. The truth is, men do get emotionally attached deeply, wholeheartedly, and sometimes even forever. But they don't attach because someone tries to convince them with words. They attach because something fundamental shifts in their soul. And that shift is triggered by 7 silent signals most people don't even notice. The first, emotional consistency. Nothing pulls a man closer than the woman who shows up with the same emotional temperature day after day, not pretending, not masking, but centered in who she is. She doesn't swing with every mood. She grounds herself, and in doing so, becomes the safest place he's ever known. Safety, not chaos, is what creates connection. And when a man finds emotional safety, he doesn't want to leave. But it's not just safety, it's being seen. Men become emotionally attached when they feel known beneath the surface. It's when he shares something fragile, his fears, his insecurities, his dreams, and you don't flinch, you don't judge, you don't fix, you hold space. Because when you meet his vulnerability with presence, you become unforgettable, not for how you looked, but for how you made him feel like he could be a man without performing. And yet it goes deeper. Men fall for the woman who respects not just who he is now, but what he's trying to become. Every man is chasing something, a purpose, a mission, a quiet dream he barely says out loud. When you speak life into that mission, when you encourage him with honesty and not flattery, when you challenge him to rise without ever diminishing his value, you're no longer a companion. You become a catalyst, and catalysts are magnetic. Here's something most people miss. Emotional connection isn't soft. It's not passive. It's forged in the fire of growth. When he sees you pursuing your life with intention, when you set boundaries, when you raise standards, not just for him, but for yourself, he can't help but admire you. Because growth recognizes growth. A man attaches not just because you support him, but because you inspire him. You call him higher, and that calling is louder than lust. Still, even the strongest man needs to feel emotionally safe to stay open. That's where emotional reciprocity comes in. You can't ask a man to give emotionally without ever receiving anything in return. Men are wired to protect their emotional world. But when he feels that his heart is valued, not manipulated, he stops protecting it. He starts offering it freely, consistently. And that's when emotional attachment transforms into emotional investment. He's not drawn to perfection. He's drawn to the way you handle imperfection with grace, with truth, with authenticity. When you stop trying to be what you think he wants and start living from your core, something shifts in him. Something wakes up. Because real men don't attach to masks, they attach to souls. So if you've ever wondered why some women leave a mark on a man forever, it's not magic, it's not manipulation, it's mastery. It's the alignment of depth, truth, softness, and strength. It's a woman who becomes a mirror, not to his ego, but to his potential. You don't have to chase. You don't have to convince. You just have to embody what is rare in today's world: integrity, consistency, vulnerability, and vision. That's when he sees you differently. That's when he feels you differently. And that's when he starts to attach emotionally, not because he has to, but because he never wants to imagine life without you again. Let your presence do the work. Let your soul speak louder than your strategy, and watch how the right man responds when he meets a woman who understands that emotional attachment is not about performing, it's about being. A man doesn't form an emotional bond through grand gestures or a highlight reel of moments. What truly anchors him is something far more subtle, yet far more powerful: emotional consistency. This isn't just about always being in a good mood or never having a bad day. Emotional consistency is about being anchored. It's about creating an environment where he doesn't have to guess who he's getting today. When a man feels like he's on a roller coaster, emotionally, he stays guarded. He may enjoy the highs, but he's constantly bracing for the fall. That kind of instability doesn't make him lean in, it makes him step back. But when you show up with a calm, grounded presence, even in the chaos of life, you become a sanctuary in a world full of storms. Emotional consistency is the opposite of volatility. It's not the absence of emotion, but the presence of emotional responsibility. It means you don't offload your stress onto him or use your emotions as a test of his loyalty. You don't weaponize silence. You don't make him the villain of your insecurities. Instead, you own your feelings, communicate with clarity, and navigate challenges without letting them destroy the emotional safety between you. That kind of steadiness is magnetic, it's rare, And it earns something most people never get from a man: emotional surrender. Because here's the truth: emotional safety is the doorway to emotional connection. If he doesn't feel safe with you emotionally, he won't open up fully. He might enjoy your company, he might even pursue you physically, but he won't hand over his heart. Why? Because a man's emotional world is often one he's been taught to guard. He's been told to stay strong, to not be vulnerable, to push down feelings that seem too much. So when he meets a woman who doesn't add to that pressure, but relieves it, something shifts. He begins to relax. And when a man relaxes, he begins to reveal. When he feels seen without judgment, when he feels loved without condition, when he feels accepted without having to be impressive every second, that's when his heart starts to move closer. Emotional consistency also signals maturity. It shows him that you're not just reacting to life, you're responding. You've done the work. You know who you are. You're not waiting for him to complete you or heal you. You're inviting him into a space that's already whole. That's powerful, because deep down, every man wants to be met by a woman who doesn't need him to fill a void, but chooses him from a place of fullness. And nothing demonstrates that more clearly than emotional consistency. Think about how it feels to be around someone unpredictable. You feel like you're walking on eggshells. You can't be yourself. You censor your words, you hold back your truth, and eventually you feel exhausted. But when someone is emotionally steady, you can breathe. You don't have to guess. You don't have to worry that one mistake will shatter everything. That's the feeling you want to create, not just for him, but for yourself too. Men don't always have the language to describe what draws them in emotionally, but they feel it. They feel when they can exhale around you. They feel when their guard comes down without effort. They feel when the space between you is safe enough to show who they are. That's when emotional attachment begins, not with passion, not with intensity, but with peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from emotional maturity, honesty, and internal stability. So when a man meets a woman who knows how to manage her own emotional world, not by pretending, but by being real, balanced, and grounded, he recognizes something extraordinary. He feels safe, and that safety is the seed from which love grows, attachment deepens, and connection becomes unshakable. Emotional vulnerability is the doorway to deep connection, and men, despite what the world often says, crave it just as much as anyone else. The problem is, most men have been conditioned not to show it. From a young age, they're taught to be strong, stoic, and in control. They're told to suppress emotions, not share them. So by the time they reach adulthood, vulnerability becomes a foreign language. They might feel things deeply, but they rarely feel safe enough to express those things fully. That's why when a man meets someone who invites vulnerability without pressure or judgment, it doesn't just feel good, it feels transformative. Emotional vulnerability isn't about dramatic confessions or emotional breakdowns. It's about those small, sacred moments when he lets you see what he doesn't show the rest of the world. It could be something as subtle as him sharing a fear he's been hiding, admitting a past mistake, or opening up about a childhood wound. These moments matter more than most people realize. Because when he chooses to show you that side of himself, he's not just sharing information, he's placing trust in your hands. And what you do with that trust determines how deeply he attaches. If you meet his vulnerability with impatience, criticism, or indifference, he retreats. He learns that opening up equals danger, and once again, he'll shut the door to his deeper emotional world. But when you meet it with empathy, curiosity, and presence, when you hold his truth gently instead of analyzing or fixing it, he leans in. He begins to associate you with relief, with comfort, with emotional rest. And when a man finds emotional rest in your presence, he doesn't want to leave it. The beauty of vulnerability is that it must be mutual. A man is far more likely to show his emotional layers when he sees you doing the same, not oversharing or dumping pain, but being real. When you allow him to see your imperfections without shame. When you talk about your growth, your struggles, your truth with honesty and grace, you give him permission to do the same. You create a space where masks aren't needed. And in that space, something remarkable happens. Intimacy is born, not physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy, the kind that roots relationships in something lasting. Men aren't drawn to women who appear perfect. They're drawn to women who are whole. Wholeness includes light and shadow, strength and softness, confidence and uncertainty. When you live from that integrated space, You radiate something magnetic, authenticity. And authenticity is what makes a man feel like he can finally exhale. He doesn't have to perform. He doesn't have to impress. He just has to be. And when he realizes he's accepted not for what he gives, but for who he is, he bonds. Not because he's being pursued, but because he's being understood. Sometimes emotional vulnerability shows up in ways that don't look dramatic. It might be the way he tells a story and pauses, waiting to see how you'll react. It might be how he hesitates before sharing something personal. It might be how he tests the waters with a light version of the truth before revealing more. These are moments that ask for presence, not pressure. The more safe he feels in these moments, the more of himself he will offer. And each offering is a step closer to real attachment. The deeper truth is, emotional vulnerability is not weakness, it's courage. And when you become someone who honors that courage without exploiting it or rushing it, you become a mirror to something sacred in him. You reflect back a version of himself that he doesn't always see, not just the provider or the protector, but the human. The layered, feeling, evolving human. And when a man feels seen like that, not through ego but through soul, he begins to form a connection that no performance, strategy, or surface level attraction could ever compete with. A man connects emotionally when he feels that the woman beside him doesn't just admire who he is in the present, but deeply respects the path he's on. Every man, consciously or unconsciously, is driven by a sense of purpose. It may not always look polished or defined, but it's there a mission, a vision, something he's striving for, whether it's in his career, personal life, or internal growth. When he senses that the person in his life genuinely supports that purpose, not just tolerates it or waits for it to change, he begins to open up emotionally. Respect for his purpose is respect for his identity. It's how a man feels valued not just for what he can give, but for who he's becoming. Too often, relationships fall into the trap of trying to mold or change the man into someone more convenient, more available, or more emotionally expressive on command. But emotional connection doesn't flourish in control. It thrives in freedom, especially the freedom for him to chase what lights him up. When a woman steps into a space where she doesn't compete with his purpose, but aligns herself beside it, she becomes part of the fuel that drives him forward. And that kind of support doesn't go unnoticed. It lands in his heart as trust. It registers as respect. And from respect, love grows. Men often attach to the woman who believes in them before the world does, not in a way that coddles or inflates ego, but in a way that affirms their value even when their journey is uncertain. When she can look at him not through the lens of his bank account, social status, or external achievements, but through the eyes of belief in who he is deep down, he starts to feel emotionally safe. That emotional safety isn't built on constant praise or blind loyalty. It's built on thoughtful encouragement, honesty without harshness, and alignment with his values. What many people don't realize is that a man's purpose is often where he feels most alive and also most vulnerable. It's where his fear of failure, his desire for significance, and his personal insecurities often hide. So when you show up with patience for the process, when you honor the discipline, time, or space he needs to build something meaningful, you're not just supporting his dream, you're validating his identity. And when a man feels that kind of validation, he naturally wants to bring you closer. He doesn't feel like he has to choose between his mission and his relationship. Instead, the relationship becomes part of his mission. Men may not say this openly, but they are profoundly moved by women who see their efforts, not just the results. When he's grinding, investing in himself, laying low to build something long-term, and you remain present, steady, and encouraging, he notices. You're not there just for the good times, you're present during the building seasons. That loyalty becomes part of how he defines you in his mind. You become associated with his growth, his courage, and the most pivotal moments of his personal development. And that's not the kind of connection he walks away from lightly. It's also important to understand that respecting a man's purpose doesn't mean disappearing into it. It's not about sidelining your own path. In fact, it's when you walk in your own purpose that you earn even more of his respect. He doesn't just want someone cheering him on. He wants someone who's also running their own race. That mutual ambition, that shared drive is what turns emotional connection into emotional partnership. You're not just in love, you're in alignment, and alignment creates the kind of bond that survives distraction, adversity, and time. When a man feels that you honor what he's trying to build, not with pressure, but with presence, when you stand beside him, not behind or in front, he lets his guard down. He invites you into the part of his life that he usually protects at all costs, his purpose. And when you're trusted with that, you're trusted with him. Emotional attachment doesn't grow in relationships that feel stagnant. It grows in spaces that stretch both people, challenge them, and invite them to evolve into better versions of themselves. A man doesn't get emotionally invested in someone who just makes life easier. He bonds with the one who makes him better. When a relationship becomes a container for growth rather than just comfort, it shifts from casual to meaningful. And men, more than they often let on, are drawn to the kind of woman who brings out that growth without needing to demand it. She inspires it by how she lives, what she stands for, and how she holds herself. Men are naturally wired to strive. They are moved by progress. When a man sees that the woman he's with is also on a path of personal development, not perfect, but committed, he feels aligned. He doesn't feel like he has to explain why he wants more from life, because she gets it. She's doing the work too. And that shared mindset becomes a strong point of emotional connection. It means the relationship isn't just built on fleeting chemistry, it's built on a shared desire to become more conscious, more present, more impactful. That's the kind of dynamic that keeps a man not only interested, but emotionally invested. Challenge, when rooted in love, is incredibly powerful. A man doesn't connect with someone who always agrees with him, flatters him, or lets everything slide. He connects with someone who sees the truth and reflects it with grace. He feels emotionally engaged when he's around a woman who isn't afraid to hold up a mirror, not to shame him, but to invite him into self-awareness. The difference lies in intention. Criticism pushes people away, but challenge, when it comes from a place of genuine care and belief in who he is, pulls him in. It tells him, I see who you are, but I also see who you could be, and I'm not afraid to call you toward it. That kind of woman doesn't settle for his potential, but she also doesn't ignore it. She lives with high standards, not just for him, but for herself. She doesn't try to fix him, but her presence naturally raises the level of the room. She speaks truth when it's needed, but always with respect. She pushes him to rise without trying to control him. And in that energy, a man doesn't feel criticized. He feels challenged in the best way. That's the challenge that makes him come alive. Mutual growth also looks like emotional resilience. A man will attach when he sees that you're not just with him for the easy days. You're willing to walk through the messiness too, without crumbling. That doesn't mean tolerating poor behavior. It means you can handle conflict without using it to wound. You can face challenges in the relationship and still choose connection. That maturity creates emotional depth, and emotional depth creates lasting bonds. When two people grow together, they start to build something that no chemistry or attraction can replace: shared evolution. It becomes a relationship where you sharpen each other, not out of insecurity, but out of mutual respect. He doesn't feel like he has to outgrow the relationship to grow as a man. Instead, he feels like the relationship supports that growth. That's where deep emotional attachment comes from, not just love, but admiration. Admiration for how you live, how you handle life, and how you bring value not just to his world, but to your own. A man will only deeply attach to someone who expands his world, not limits it. He doesn't want someone who demands growth from him, but resists it in herself. He wants to build a life with someone who is running her race, embracing her process, and still making space for him to do the same. That shared pursuit of becoming, evolving, improving is what forges the kind of emotional connection that doesn't fade, it deepens, it strengthens, and it transforms everything. Emotional reciprocity is one of the most overlooked foundations of emotional attachment in a man. While men are often perceived as emotionally distant or detached, the reality is that they feel deeply when they feel safe enough to do so. And one of the clearest indicators of emotional safety is reciprocity. A man may give, try, and show up consistently in the beginning, but if he doesn't feel anything coming back, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, he eventually starts to shut down. Not because he's disinterested, but because giving without receiving chips away at his ability to stay emotionally engaged. Men don't need everything returned exactly the way they give it, but they do need to feel that their emotional energy is landing somewhere. If he expresses care, opens up about something vulnerable, or makes effort in the relationship, and it's met with indifference or emotional distance, he starts to question whether it's safe to keep investing. He might not say it out loud. He might not even fully understand the shift himself. But internally, he starts pulling back, not as a punishment, but as self-protection. Emotional reciprocity isn't about keeping score. It's about balance. It's about creating an emotional environment where both people feel equally valued and emotionally nourished. When a man feels like he's the only one opening up, the only one checking in, or the only one trying to move things forward, it starts to feel like a one-sided effort. That imbalance becomes emotionally exhausting, and exhaustion kills intimacy. What keeps him engaged, connected, and emotionally invested is knowing that his heart is not being taken for granted, that when he leans in, you lean in too, that when he offers his truth, you don't just listen, you meet it with your own. Men don't always know how to articulate their emotional needs. That's why emotional reciprocity often speaks louder than words. It shows up in how you respond to his openness. Do you meet it with presence? Or do you shift the focus back to yourself? Do you allow space for his emotions, or do you subtly shame him for feeling too much? It also shows up in small, everyday choices, the way you initiate sometimes instead of waiting for him to lead every time. The way you express appreciation, not just expect effort. The way you acknowledge his emotional labor, not just his physical or financial contributions. When a man feels emotionally appreciated, not just emotionally used, something opens up in him. He begins to feel secure. He doesn't have to question where he stands. He doesn't have to chase validation. Instead, he experiences the rare and healing feeling of emotional equity. That mutual exchange allows him to drop the armor. It tells him he's not alone in building the emotional bridge. You're walking across it too. And when he senses that effort is shared, his emotional investment deepens. There's a unique kind of intimacy that forms when two people are emotionally generous with one another. Not needy, not demanding, but generous. It's the emotional, I see you, that comes not only through words, but through consistency, patience, and thoughtful action. And it's this generosity that turns a good relationship into a great one. Because emotional connection isn't built on what's said once. It's built on how you continually respond to one another, especially in the small moments. A man doesn't attach to someone who makes him guess how she feels. He attaches to someone who shows him, not just through grand romantic gestures, but through emotional attentiveness, through effort that mirrors his own, through the courage to be vulnerable in return. That emotional balance, that mutual risk, that shared willingness to feel, those are the ingredients that make emotional attachment real, lasting, and profound when he feels you're not just taking what he gives, but also giving in return. That's when he begins to truly feel emotionally safe, and it's in safety that love truly takes root. When it comes to emotional attachment, many believe that men are either incapable of it or need to be chased into it. But the truth is far more profound. Men do attach fully, deeply, and even permanently when they encounter the kind of presence that touches their soul, not just their senses. It isn't manipulation that bonds a man's heart, it's meaning. It's the 7 unseen forces: emotional consistency, shared vulnerability, deep respect for his purpose, mutual growth, emotional reciprocity, and the others that make him feel not just attracted, but safe, inspired, and seen. When a man finds a woman who reflects back the highest version of himself, not through flattery, but through her own alignment, her own emotional wisdom, he doesn't just attach. He invests, he begins to build, not just a relationship, but a life. So if you want a love that isn't temporary, a connection that doesn't fade when the passion cools, and a man who is all in, not because he was pressured, but because he chose to be, then don't chase. Don't perform, embody. Become the woman who lives in her truth, walks in her wholeness, and meets a man not with demands, but with depth. Because it's not your beauty, charm, or even your effort that makes a man stay. It's how you make him feel like he's home, in your energy, in your presence, in your heart. Thank you for listening to this message. I hope it stirred something deep within you, because you are worthy of a love that is real, mature, soul-rooted, and reciprocal. Stay true to yourself, keep growing, and never forget the right person doesn't need to be chased, they recognize you. Take care of your heart, keep showing up with grace and strength, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much, and goodbye.